Good afternoon. My name is Sakina Moore, and I'm the Program Director of the Monuments Toolkit project. On behalf of World Heritage USA and the Monuments Toolkit project, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Conservation of Divisive Monuments. World Heritage USA is headquartered in Washington, D.C., which is the traditional territory of the Nakontek, the Anacostan, and the Piscataway people. It is not merely enough to do land acknowledgements, but we have to put forth how do we support Indigenous communities in the future. With the Monuments Toolkit project, we are looking at legacies that our societies uphold and are making the links to social injustice, health injustice, and economic injustice that these monuments have come to symbolize. We do this by uplifting stories that were ignored and untold, by inviting conversations as we get into these uncomfortable places. We will offer a toolkit for communities that are facing controversial and oppressive monuments, whether it is through removal, reinterpretation, and recontextualization. We would like to thank the Mellon Foundation for their generous support, without which our work would not be possible. We do invite you to visit www.worldheritageusa.org to sign up to receive updates on the work that we are doing. Again, welcome, and I want to introduce you to William Humphrey, Program Associate for Research and Publications, who will be moderating today's webinar.
Hello, everyone. Greetings, and welcome to October's rendition of the World Heritage USA Monuments Toolkit webinar series. It's been quite some time since the last entry, but this month's topic is a little different from what we usually cover. This webinar will be focusing on the conservation of divisive monuments. And I know by now you're probably used to our vocabulary of oppressive or controversial, in that it's very easy to identify what some of the issues are with a structure or a site. But in this scenario, it's not that the monument in question is oppressive or controversial, but the significance of the monument with regards to the social climate of Mexico and Mexico City has raised the awareness of locals and activists in the area on regards to feminicide, or the violence and crimes against women that have occurred in the city. I find that this topic is very unique as well because it includes protests or demonstrations made by conservationists. And this is something often not documented within the toolkit. So I hope that you're all able to enjoy and think deeply about the content that's about to be presented to you today. I'll be introducing Dr. Christina Garduño Freeman. Christina is a senior lecturer at UNSW. Her research contributes to architectural history, critical heritage, and digital humanities, as well as exploring people's connections with places by engaging with contemporary culture through the discourses of reception, place attachment, social value, and participatory digital cultures. Her work seeks to strengthen the interconnections across design, society, and the built environment through interdisciplinary research, and she aims to bridge both the Haas and STEM fields via methodologies from social sciences and computing, which include digital ethnography, visual analysis, and data analytics. I would also like to welcome to the stream Dr. Marco Antonio Chavez Aguajo. Dr. Marco is one of many. He is a cultural manager, lawyer, psychologist, and musician, as well as a tenured full professor at the System of Virtual University of the University of Guadalajara in Mexico. He is a chartered scientist and a chartered psychologist of the United Kingdom and a national researcher of the National System of Researchers in Mexico, holding a PhD in Culture and Heritage Management and a master's degree in Cultural Management by the University of Barcelona, Spain, and a master's degree in Comparative Studies of Literature, Art, and Thought by the Pompeu Fabra University in Spain. Please welcome them both to the presentation.
My name is Christina Garduno Freeman, and today with Marco Antonio Chavez Aguayo, we're going to present some work that we have been doing over the past 3 years and that was presented for the ICMOS General Assembly 2020 marker event in Sydney. And some of you may know that it was cancelled, and we just recently had the pleasure of hosting almost 1,500 delegates to Sydney for the ICMOS General Assembly 2023. All right, so I'm going to share my screen now. Let me just put that.
Well, first of all, good afternoon, and I would like to thank World Heritage USA for this invitation to be a panelist in this Monuments Toolkit webinar. Greetings from Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, where I am from and I work on. We are very happy to share with you this research we did on contested and difficult heritage happening in Mexico regarding the femicide and feminicide happening all along our country, which is a very sad situation, and how it was interrelated with heritage on this protest, particularly as the monument called the Angel of Independence, well, commonly known as that, but formally it is a monument celebrating the Mexican independence from the Spanish Empire. But in this protest, there was a shift in, or maybe there was an addition of meaning from the protesters who brought a different and opposed meaning to the original significance of the monument.
Great. Thank you so much, Marco, for filling in. So you should be able to see the images now of the Angel of Independence. And what we're going to do is to split the paper between the two of us. But as you can see, it's a very collaborative partnership in terms of our research. So really in this paper, we wanted to present a Latin American perspective on shared culture, one which is difficult and confronting, femicide. This shared culture, one which results in gender-based violence perpetrated against women, comes to light through the graffitiing of one important monument in Mexico, the Angel of Independence. So the term femicide has been used since 1976 as a way to differentiate violent crimes and deaths of women from the more gender-neutral term homicide. The concept has brought attention to a social order which is blind to those deaths as a strategy for inciting change in the countries where this is particularly prevalent. And there's a really wonderful femicide, Routledge Handbook of Femicide, that's just been published, which I would recommend if you're interested in that area. In Mexico, feminist Marcela Lagrade redefined femicide into a Spanish feminicidio to include the, and I quote, ensemble of violations of women's human rights, which contain the crimes against the disappearances of women. In the Federal Penal Code of Mexico, feminicide is clearly defined as a crime, but this is not the case at state level throughout the country. Only 19 of Mexico's 32 states recognize feminicide. In English, femicide and feminicide are used simultaneously. However, in this paper, we use both concepts, the former to differentiate the gender-based crime of murdering a woman, and the latter to include the continuum of violence, including inaction and human rights violations against women. The shared culture of feminicide needs to be contextualized in relation to misogynist attitudes. In Mexico, machismo is culturally embedded and widespread. Machismo is a complex set of beliefs associated with the prejudiced misconception of women as inferior to men at its core. One of the most persistent narratives in our society is the notion of machismo with its inherent sexism, a definite feature of all Latino cultures, say Hurtado and Sina in 2016. Machismo perhaps offers individuals and societies a way to rationalize the mistreatment of women. This problem, of course, is not isolated to Mexico. Many other Latin American nations and also Anglophone nations, including Australia, have struggled with this issue for decades, if not centuries. It is sobering that the number of women killed annually in Mexico is only second to Brazil, and the problem is growing. Since 2017, the rate of feminicide in Mexico has increased from 7 to 10.5 cases per day, and increased 1.6% across the same period in the previous year. The problems of femicide and feminicide in Mexico are serious and much more complex and nuanced than our discussion and expertise can explore here. We want to be clear that we are not seeking to report on, resolve, or comment on the issues of femicide or feminicide themselves, except to state that we absolutely do not support such heinous acts of violence. What we are attempting to do here is to describe how such acrimonious practices are examples of a shared culture, and secondly, how in certain instances they can become contested heritage. The lack of government actions on feminicide has led to massive protests in several towns and cities in Mexico since 2019. People have taken to the streets and called for justice and peace for women across the country. It is the entanglement of heritage within the actions of protesters that prompted our reflection on a contemporary instance where shared culture and national heritage meet, where the social use of a monument transforms shared culture into difficult heritage. One of Mexico's most iconic monuments is the Columna de Independencia. The monument is a 45-meter high victory column that you can see in the image in front of you. It celebrates Mexico's 1821 independence from the former Spanish Empire. At the top of the column stands a golden sculpture of the Greek goddess Nike. This Victoria Alada stands atop a single tapered column that resembles those erected by the ancient Romans to honor their emperors. In Mexico, where Roman Catholicism dominates and its rich iconography abounds, the Victoria Alada is colloquially known as El Ángel, or the angel. A quirk of Spanish grammar requires the use of a masculine pronoun. The column rises from a rectilinear base embellished with stone and bronze figures that are allegories of law, war, justice, and peace, a powerful symbol of the city recognized by tourists and loved by Mexicans alike. El Ángel de la Independencia was erected in 1910 under the auspices of Porfirio Díaz Mori, Mexico's president at the time, to celebrate the centenary of the commencement of the War of Independence. The monument was initially designed as a cenotaph by Mexican architect Antonio Rivas Mercado. In 1923, it was converted to a mausoleum when 3 niches were added to the interior of the column to enshrine the relocated remains of Mexico's 12 heroes of independence, who successively led armies of mixed race, or mestizos, and indigenous insurgents to fight against colonial Spanish rule. In 1929, an eternal flame to honor Mexico's heroes was installed under the presidential decree of Emilio Portes Gil. The heroes interred within El Ángel de la Independencia included highly respected figures, such as the father of the nation, in inverted commas, Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. Most of the heroes are men, with one exception. Leona Vicario is recognized here as a heroine. Vicario was one of the first female journalists in Mexico and played a key role in the War of Independence. She supported the insurgents financially and with intelligence, secretly informing them of enemy movement within Mexico City. Vicario, unlike many of the insurgents, was from a conservative aristocratic background. She could be understood to be one of Mexico's first feminists. Indeed, the Mexican government has declared 2020 the year of Leona Vicario, meritorious mother of the nation. However, remains of the heroes, including Vicarios, are no longer located at El Ángel de la Independencia. In May 2010, under the presidency of Felipe Calderón Hinojosa, they were moved to the nearby Federal Palace and Museum, El Castillo de Chapultepec, the Castle of Chapultepec. El Ángel was listed as a site of national heritage in 1987. The columns, stone base, sculptures, and golden victory are protected and defined as an artistic monument inscribed for its significance as an urban and aesthetic symbol of Mexico City. Artistic monuments in Mexico are managed by the Instituto Nacional de Bellas Artes y Literatura, INBAL, whereas historic monuments, and that is limited to those dating from the 16th century to the 19th century, are managed by the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, so two different institutions, which is different to other countries, but it is significant in this particular case. The urban context and location of El Ángel also contributes to its symbolic and arguably its social value. So the monument is situated along one of Mexico City's major arteries, a 14.7 kilometer celebratory boulevard known as El Paseo de la Reforma, or the Promenade of the Reform. It connects with the Castillo de Chapultepec and the center of the city. It's a large multi-lane traffic route with several large glorietas, or roundabouts, we call them in Australia, punctuating its trajectory. The glorietas along this boulevard make them urban landmarks and popular tourist attractions in this densely populated metropolis. So the power of El Ángel as a symbol of Mexican identity, as well as an urban landmark, means it is frequently used for both celebration and protest. While it is an aesthetic symbolism that is protected in national inscription, the contemporary use by Mexicans and visitors alike indicates that it's also socially significant. So in Australian heritage discourse and legislative frameworks, social value, and this is I quote Chris Johnson, has developed an important way that concepts such as shared identity can be expressed in relation to heritage places. Globally, it offers a much needed perspective aligned with people-centered approaches and with the potential to co-create understandings of values with those who hold those values. So large groups of people congregate at El Ángel to celebrate sporting wins as often as they do to advocate for political change. One example is the political protest led by the current Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, as a response to his election loss to his opponent, Felipe Calderón, in 2006. López Obrador claimed that there had been an electoral fraud and led a campaign to block the whole of the Paseo de la Reforma for 47 days, causing turmoil and unrest, as well as severe economic damage to local businesses and obviously obstruction to daily use. The use of El Ángel for political resistance or for celebrating a sporting win reveals the social value of this urban landmark. It holds a kind of potent charge. So in this sense, a monument is more than a historic reminder, but rather, and I quote, it evokes the continuous, daily, and often unconscious engagement between us and our environment, where people, place, and memory all have agency, end quote. It is the agency of El Ángel to bear witness to the uncomfortable shared culture of feminicide that is significant here. Over its lifetime, El Ángel has required maintenance and restoration, like all monuments, due to Mexico City's propensity for earthquakes. The monument structure was damaged in 1957, causing the golden sculpture of Nike to crash to the ground. Again, in 1985, El Ángel was damaged in a terrible earthquake, in which some 5,000 people died in Mexico City. This revered icon has sustained damage on many occasions, but until 2019, it had never been defaced intentionally. So in 2019, women and men gathered in Mexico City en masse to protest the increasing rate of femicide and feminicide. Their rage had been incited by two recent episodes of endemic sexual violence. The first, an underage girl on her way home after a party was raped by 4 policemen in Mexico City. Days later, another girl was raped by a policeman in a museum. And protesters, particularly women, were as indignant as they were fearful. No amount of disruption seemed to be enough to motivate officials to address the sustained violence towards women, from constant catcalling to murder. The suspected policemen were suspended, an investigation commissioned. Mexico City's mayor, Claudia Sheinbaum, addressed the protesters, stating she would not comment and instead remain impartial until the investigation was complete. Some people interpreted this as a guise to protect the policemen. Sheinbaum was judged as betraying women, particularly because she was a woman. Protesters expected stronger support against feminicide from the first female mayor of the capital city. They saw her behaviour as further evidence of her lack of support for women's safety, as several civil rights organisations had been demanding a gender alert in Mexico City since 2017. Now, declaring a gender alert or a gender violence alert against women activates an emergency law. This forces the government to take action by adopting economic and social measures to address the cause of the alert. In this case, femicide and feminicide violence. This legal mechanism is articulated in Mexico's federal law for women's human rights. Article 23 describes the motives that can trigger a gender alert, which include when the common crimes against life, freedom, integrity, and security of women disturb the social peace in a particular territory, and so the society reclaims. And when the human rights organisations on either the national or state level, the civil and social organisations and or the international organisations request. So these are the two that trigger it. Considering such continued horrendous acts by policemen, it seems unthinkable that a gender alert had not been declared. The lack of action to reduce and eliminate feminicide propelled protesters to take a new approach to public action. On the 12th of August, 2019, a group of mostly female protesters gathered in front of the headquarters of the Ministry for Citizen Security of Mexico City. As Jesus Horta Martinez, Mexico City's Minister for Security and Chief Police Officer, exited the building, protesters showered him in pink glitter. The minister's slicked black hair became stained with Mexican pink. The magenta hue, synonymous since the 1950s with Mexico, visually contaminated, even subverted the minister's masculine authority by covering him with the ultimate feminine shimmer. Rivulets of pink sparkle ran down over his pristine black tailored jacket. In that instance, pink glitter became a symbol of defiance for protesters. This image of this authoritative man at the same time a policeman, a government security officer, and most importantly, a government minister wounded by pink glitter was widely publicised. The upset minister described these actions as a provocation, but did not press charges. And So social media at that time exploded with commentaries, memes, tweets in response to the glitzy assault on Horta Martinez. Images of the protesters with clouds of pink mist, pink placards denouncing police as protectors, illustrators of angry naked women dusted in glitter, solid squares of magenta and glitter. And we have an image that we can move to, Marco. People shared photographs of Horta Martinez covered in pink and addressed his emotional indifference with irony. People said, "Wey, te echaron diamantina morada en tu trajecito. No te violaron colectivamente 4 policías. Eso sí debería imputarse, no mames." So, and our translation is, "Dude, they threw purple glitter on your precious suit. You weren't raped collectively by 4 policemen. This is what should piss you off. Come on, don't bullshit me." So this was a tweet by Larusso that we translated. Larusso's tweet was retweeted 2,000 times and liked over 7,000 times. Many other potent examples of the resonance of this incident played out online as people participated in the protests, like the Pussy Hat Project, where pink knitted beanies identified women's rights marches in the USA in 2016. In Mexico, pink, purple, and magenta glitter, so usually associated with the demure, passive, and objectivized femininity, became vehicles for civil disobedience, a weapon against rape culture, a revolution. 4 days later, on the 16th of August, further acts of feminicide were reported. The body of a woman in the state of Hidalgo was found discarded under a bridge after she slept and having been tortured and abused. And a 6-year-old child was brutally stabbed while she slept during a visit to her grandparents in Cuernavaca, Morelos, a neighboring state to Mexico City. A massive crowd of protesters marched some 850 meters from La Glorieta de los Insurgentes, the largest roundabout in Mexico City, to El Ángel. On their way, the protesters broke glass and hurled pink and purple glitter throughout the central district of Mexico, seeking to make themselves seen and heard. When they reached El Ángel, they inscribed their voices on the national symbol of independence. They etched and painted graffiti onto the stone and bronze base of Mexico City's national heritage icon. The social significance of these willful inscriptions on heritage was evidenced by how widely the images of the inscriptions were shared in traditional and social media, nationally and internationally. Some of the protesters' words, which were graffitied over the monument, stated, "Mexico feminicide, policemen rapists, the police kill us. I want you alive. I want myself alive. Do not play with us, girls. And you don't protect us, you kill us." The graffiti covered the plaque celebrating the sacrifices and efforts of heroes who had brought independence to Mexico City. Their protesters' words now subverted the plaque's values, demanded women's safety and independence. In the days that followed, the city authorities boarded up El Ángel with plain wooden barricades, intending to immediately clean and restore the monument. And this is where the project gets and the situation becomes really complex and interesting. Their move provoked intense public debate on the removal of the graffiti of the protesters. Some criticized the defacement of the monument, while others could not understand why the severe problem of violence against women was not at the forefront of people's concerns. Some people felt outraged because the authorities seemed more eager to restore El Ángel than to investigate the feminicides that had occurred in the past and were continuing to occur nationwide. So in the midst of this debate, a group of all-female qualified heritage professionals quickly formed via social media. This kind of union called themselves Restauradoras con Glitter, female restorers with glitter, cleverly referencing the pink glitter thrown at Horta Martinez a few days earlier. The group petitioned their profession to stand against feminicide by refusing their professional services to the government, in particular to Inbal, to clean and restore El Ángel. Restauradores con Glitter asked their colleagues to undertake these protests until the safety of women in Mexico is guaranteed. The Restauradores con Glitter hoped that this form of industrial action could force the government to address Mexico's continued femicides and feminicides. They were taking hostage their national heritage. Official spokesperson for the group, Ayoitli Estrada, declared, no, and I quote, "No monument is more important than a woman or any person. It is our motto," end quote. She went on, arguing that, quote, "What is the point of preserving a monument if the people are being killed? A monument's damage is reversible, but the murder of a woman is not," end quote. The Restauradores con Glitter had a point. 5 days after the defacement of El Ángel on the 21st of August 2019, Restauradores con Glitter posted a kind of manifesto on Twitter. Their collective letter to the federal and local authorities and media carried over 600 signatures from many of the most important restoration and preservation professionals in Mexico. Notably, heritage conservation is a female-dominated field in Mexico. The letter stated their refusal to collaborate with the government to restore El Ángel. The manifesto was extensively shared by traditional and social media channels. This pressure convinced Mexico City's mayor, Sheinbaum, and later the culture minister of Mexico City, José Alfonso Suárez de Real, to meet with the representatives of Restauradores con Glitter. Through these meetings, the Restauradores con Glitter were able to negotiate permission to enter behind the wooden barricades that obscured the graffiti on El Ángel, with the goal of documenting and creating a digital register of the graffiti. Over 3 separate days, a group of 30 restauradores were granted access to El Ángel. They made a record of the graffiti through photography, video, drone footage, photogrammetry, and laser scanning, using their own equipment, clear in the knowledge that their access was highly contingent. They understood the cultural significance of the graffiti, how it was a new layer of meaning, a conversation with the monument. Their intervention intended to ensure that the voices of the women protesting against femicide would not be silenced or purely articulated as a digital kind of echo on the media and the internet. And I will hand over now to Marco, who will take over on the second part of the paper.
Thank you, Cristina. So after the 30 restauradores were granted access to register the intervention or, well, in quote, intervention or, quote, defacement, better say intervention, or even better, contesting the monument. Several days, on the days following, several community groups, including Restauradoras con Glitter, invited women to congregate anew at the Angel. In the midst of the conversation and discussion and public discussion of whether this monument should be cleaned and how to address this cleaning and how the government put around wooden barricades that obscured the intervention, they congregated around to decorate the barricades around the base of the monument with paintings, stories of missing people, slogans, pink glitter, and knitted purple hearts. This reformation, however, did not last long, as one of the restorers of con Glitter said, Gilda Pasco Saldaña, quote, "On the next day, everything was cleared by the city authorities," end quote. The inaction of the authorities and their continual censorship and disregard for the protesters' message served to increase the protesters' rage and discontent. During the last month, civil organizations continued to demand a gender-led alert to be declared, This is a legal form that triggers a different action from the government by the federal and the city governments were against declaring the gender alert, repeatedly refusing to do so. But these civil organizations took the authorities to a judicial inquiry, an amparo trial that they won, and the final judgment ordered the alert to be declared. However, Major Sheinbaum, who, by the way, is the main candidate to become the next Mexican president, considered the declaration of the gender alert, saying that it was made by her own free will. And finally, in late November 2019, Mexico City declared this gender alert. For now, the angel remains boarded up. The monument remained boarded up for several months, even years, closed and inaccessible to tourists and public alike. Once a major landmark of Mexico City, a place of pride, now is obscured and appears abandoned and derelict. The monument's cleaning and restoration program have been halted by protests of women, the standby heritage professionals, and the measure required for social isolation in response to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. However, since the initial protest of clean glitter in August 2019, many other demonstrations have taken place, from hundreds of red shoes representing missing women in El Zócalo, which is Mexico City's main square, to mass vocal protests in various Mexican cities on International Women's Day on Saturday, 8th of March 2020, and on the next day with a strike called A Day Without Women. At the start of this paper, we described El Ángel as a monument that depicted Nike, the golden goddess of victory, as a symbol of celebrating Mexico's independence. For decades, this heritage place was associated with freedom, justice, lawfulness, and peace. The angel was a place for shared culture, for national identity, for the celebration of sporting achievements, and many other demonstrations. The angel was a way to mediate personal and collective identity and to raise a sense of community. As a community or as a society, we select certain examples of culture and decide that they should be recognized as heritage. Heritage was seen to be inherent to the physical object or to a place. However, this more contemporary understanding sees heritage as instrumental. Heritage is not predetermined. Rather, we make heritage, a process which is framed within social values. We assert in this paper that heritage is a shared culture which we choose to conserve and as representative of ourselves and our ideas. Heritage is therefore always shared culture, but shared culture is not always heritage. At times, however, some examples of shared culture, such as feminicide, are not to be celebrated, obviously. They are hard and difficult heritage. After some time has passed, such shared culture may become heritage as a way of remembering and acknowledging past atrocities perpetrated against, or bygone tragedies experienced by particular groups of people. This has been conceptualized as difficult heritage. Its purpose serves as a reminder of events that we do not want to experience again. Importantly, in this conceptualization, difficult heritage recognizes shared culture of the past. It does not focus on violent atrocities occurring in the present and extending into the future. So the proposed restoration of El Ángel by the Mexican government was presented as a simple act of conservation and repair. However, it subversively constituted a politically symbolic act of erasure. To the protesters against feminicide and the restauradoras con glitter, the graffiti was culturally charged and significant artifact. Their resistance to cleaning and thereby restoring the monument was founded on their understanding that social value can be embodied across practices, places, and digital proliferation. Cleaning and restoration, by extension, are always selective conservation decisions. Restoration and conservation are contextualized within certain value systems. Why do we choose to keep the patina from one period of time over another? Why do we privilege clean stone over pollution that is arguably as much our cultural heritage? In proposing the restoration of El Ángel, the Mexican authorities were clearly intending to institutionally articulate what is valued, what constitutes national culture, and which meanings are to be authorized. The cleaning and restoration of this national monument, we argue, were a means to obfuscate the authorities' lack of action against femicide and feminicide. One of Mexico's most beloved monuments was transformed into a canvas, a substrate on which to spell out the gross political, social, and cultural complacency that sees itself fit to be complicit in the murder of women. Is it a form of spontaneous social iconoclasm? And is it a form of defacement intended to challenge and contest the traditional meanings and values ascribed to a monument? The glitter, the graffiti, the resistance to cleaning, and the reinscriptions on the wooden barricades all work to contest the authorized meaning of El Ángel. The monument's urban location and symbolic role as a venue for celebrating and meeting, as an icon for the city and a tourist landmark, all make it a powerful site to protest and claim agency. This engagement between people and place aligns with the social significance of heritage. The engagement between people and heritage is highlighted within the Mexican national anthem itself. While some media outlets argued the graffiti was a defacement of El Ángel, many others on Twitter, including the restauradoras con glitter, shared the sixth stanza of the Mexican national anthem. The sixth stanza describes a foreign enemy attack where only the ruins of Mexican civilization are left to speak out for the fallen heroes among the bloodshed. In sharing this particular stanza, the restauradoras con glitter and other communities drew a parallel between the fallen enemy and the endemic problem, femicide and feminicide. But this poetry, coupled with the music of Jaime Munoz, just express the potency of monuments in speaking on behalf of the silenced, the gagged, the repressed and the muted, and ultimately the murdered. These are the lyrics. Antes patria que inermes tus hijos, bajo el yugo su cuello dobleguen, tus campiñas con sangre se rieguen, sobre sangre se estampe su pie, y sus templos, palacios y torres se derrumben con hórrido estruendo, y sus ruinas existan, diciendo, de 1000 héroes la patria aquí fue, which on our literal translation is, motherland, before your children become unarmed, beneath the yoke their necks in sway, may your countryside be drenched with blood, on blood their feet trample, and your temples, palaces, and towers may crumble with horrid crash, and may their ruins exist, saying, the motherland here belongs to 1,000 heroes. When the protesters cried, "What is the point of preserving a monument if the people are being killed?" they were denouncing the inherent significance of El Ángel. When they covered the monument in inscriptions with graffiti and pink glitter, when they contested it with those inscriptions, they intended their acts to be digitally mediated. Where does that leave the profession of restoration? What heritage structures and objects should be cleaned? Should graffiti be erased or honored? Restoration, conservation, and commemoration become significant when they acknowledge heritage as a social and political process. Making conservation decisions, such as removing or ignoring political graffiti, can enact narratives of violence and or erasure. Further, when women dominate the profession of restoration, as they do in Mexico, why should they not resist cleaning graffiti that demands respect and equality for women? Their acts are and stand not only against feminicide, but also a refusal to comply with the patriarchal way heritage is defined, understood, and talked about, and in turn, in the way it reproduces and legitimizes gender identities and the social values that underpin them. These attacks on monuments cannot simply be dismissed as unthinking acts of destruction. In many ways, they are transformative and profound. In the assessment of social value in the case of Port Arthur, Tasmania, Chris Johnson identified heritage professionals as one of the common communities for which the place has powerful associations. The formation and actions of restauradoras con glitter have similarly demonstrated the connection between heritage and professionals and El Ángel. This interweaving of the shared culture of feminicide and sites of national heritage significance is critical to ensuring heritage remains relevant. Otherwise, we run the risk of preserving the obsolete, the meaningless, and the irrelevant. Traditional approaches to heritage support a culture of stasis that non-problematically privileges accumulation. As heritage professionals, the restauradoras con glitter are exemplary in recognizing the graffiti inscriptions as new heritage, warranting conservation. This is not a singular case. The Edward Colston statue, aged 125 years, was also graffitied, pulled down, and thrown into Bristol Harbour, England, during a June 2020 public protest. Like restauradoras con glitter, in the case of the Colston statue, heritage professionals opt to conserve the graffiti as it has become part of the story of the object of the statue. So our job is to try to retain as much as possible while stabilizing the statue for the long term, end quote. The new layer of meaning on El Ángel, on which both reveals and redefines the palimpsest of this heritage place, disrupt the national discourse. Restauradoras' acts of resistance to participating in the monument restoration and cleaning is a refusal to endorse a shared institutional and national narrative that is not seen to include women. Restauradoras con glitter, comprising female heritage professionals, have become exemplary activists in the protest against femicide and feminicide. They choose to resist the government's intentions of cleaning graffiti from El Ángel, regarding the graffiti as a new heritage and worthy of conservation as a form of social memory and history. The restorers recognized the graffiti as representing subaltern voices and the people warranting documentation and protection. In conclusion, since the 16 August 2019 protest against femicide and feminicide, El Ángel de Independencia, the angel of independence in Mexico City, turned into a symbol of contested gender and difficult national heritage and social injustice, a female heritage covered with pink glitter. Thank you very much.
Well, that was a really good presentation, and we thank you very much for that. I'd like to now move on to the question and answer section. So Doctors Marco and Christina, I would like to ask you, when comparing shared culture with different heritage, to what extent does nationalism complicate social justice?
I think I feel like there's probably 2 or 3 questions in there, Gilbert. Firstly, I think that, understanding that shared culture is in a sense a form of perhaps non-listed heritage is important. And I think that's come about because of the recognition of intangible heritage in 2003. And that in combination with the expansion of social media and participatory platforms online, I think has given a voice or a way to actually start to evidence this kind of shared culture and protests against it. And in this paper, what becomes really clear is that the significance of the monument is almost appropriated or borrowed in order to subvert the national identity or the national discourse around that monument in a way that represents what's really happening in a kind of contemporary sense. So there's a number of things that this particular case starts to reveal. Firstly, that our discourse of heritage doesn't necessarily give us a language to talk about the interaction between difficult heritage of the present and national monuments of the past, and how they actually come together to present not new perspectives, but rather together they actually are a much more potent message.
Very good response. Thank you, Dr. Christina. Dr. Marco, would you like to jump in as well on answering that question? What are your thoughts? What would you like to add?
Oh, sorry. I think sometimes the official discourse of nationalism is separated from social justice. And the Angel of Independence is a case when this connection appears. So why not thinking about nationalism defending the killing of women? And how are we more interested in preserving a monument that speaks from another time and not from the problems that are occurring today?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Marco, for that. The second question I would like to ask you too is, oftentimes we are too quick to denounce the actions of protesters as senseless destruction. What are your thoughts on the difference between riot and protest? Either of you go.
Do you want to go first, Marco, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, well, in this case, well, in fact, the first reaction from the public, from the audience, was to label these interventions of their process of defacement. But as we have noted in our article, I think they are more a way of contesting the monument and contesting the official discourse, because the government was being blind or inactive about the femicide and the feminicide, And then the discussion went towards what the restorers of glitter pointed out, why it is more important to preserve the monument or to clean the monument or to erase this mark of protest than working to solve this endemic problem. Because at this moment, not even a gender alert was declared that is supposed to be the legal and the political tool to act when the femicides and the feminicides peak. Your turn, Christine.
So I think this is a really interesting question, and it's part of work that we're currently undertaking on a book chapter. But I think it's to do with the level of intervention. So the graffiti on El Ángel did not stop you reading El Ángel as the original monument. And I guess this just comes back to this conversation between the shared culture at the time and the monument that was erected in the past. You can still see both. So you have two agencies happening at the same time. And so it's defacement rather than destruction. With destruction, I think that had the monument been completely obliterated, as you know, has happened to many significant sites across the world and is currently, you know, we know that there are, you know, tragedies happening in Israel and the Ukraine. It's a kind of a complete destruction. And so there's no conversation happening. And I think it's that space between the two acts that actually enables the meaning of the monument to share its potency to the contemporary issue at hand. And so in your question, you talk about the difference between riots and protests. And I would say that what you're suggesting is that riots end in destruction because they're more violent and senseless, whereas protests are much more considered. You know, there was, I think, a very deliberate marking of the monument in order to take up that space for a particular social issue.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me add something. Well, what I think is interesting with this case of El Ángel is that the authorized discourse or the original discourse of the monument was celebratory. And now it has a new meaning that is shared and contested between the people who want to see this monument as celebratory, as a reminder of freedom, etc., and others who now see this monument, like the women, as a showcase or as a way of make more visible the problem of femicide and feminicide. So it became from, let's say, a single kind of monument or heritage towards contested heritage, and also a contested putting against a celebratory meaning with a difficult meaning. And the difficult meaning is not about things that happened in the past, but problems that are occurring in the present.
I appreciate those well thought out responses. I would like to now ask one last final question. The final question that I would like to ask both of you is about social media and social media activism. So social media activism is often criticized for providing skin-deep solutions to complex situations. However, these same websites provide simultaneous coverage of social movements and changes to our public space. What do you believe, do you believe that social media reception played a large part in the successful protest of the Restauradoras con Glitter group?
Okay. So to give a little bit of background, a lot of my research has on social value and how we might evidence it, has really looked at the way that social media, and really I would expand that to the internet and all of the different kinds of platforms, including institutional repositories and, you know, museums accounts on Flickr or Facebook pages of organizations such as World Heritage USA, have actually created, if you like, a platform where all of these discussions can actually be documented in real time. So I would say that the restauradores con glitter were quite strategic in ensuring that there was a visual representation that could be circulated in order to kind of increase its potency. Now, I think it's interesting that you say that social media movements are kind of skin deep. I'm not sure that they always are. I think social media and, you know, tweets and likes and all of these sorts of things are quite often disregarded for being, you know, non-authorized, or, you know, they can be, you know, generated by bots, and we have to be aware of this, and we have to have a wide digital literacy around what is actually being published. And of course, misinformation comes into this. But by the same token, what we can start to see is to be able to document some of these things in ways that previously we couldn't. So photographs that previously may have resided in boxes or albums in people's houses now become available to en masse, to be able to see what it is that has you know, potency for groups of people. So it's not so much how many tweets, but what are the tweets saying? And it's that level of interpretation that I think is quite important when we think about social media, rather than just thinking about it as a kind of a skin deep solution. Because I think what's come out of this particular monument is a real movement for the visualization or visual communication, or a visual culture to try and decry feminicide using the visual as a medium for gaining attention. And that is something that the internet and social media has really brought to the fore. We're moving into a video arena. Images now have much more importance than they used to. So I think it's a much more complex question than just whether their message is skin deep, but I think that raising that message in the first place is significant. And then it takes work from professionals and from communities to come to solutions that really address the issues of that are being raised. So in my thinking, for example, with El Ángel, you know, perhaps that graffiti should have stayed until a time that it was not needed anymore, and then it could have been cleaned. But to clean it before feminicide has truly been addressed seems to me an erasure of the issue. Marco?
Yes, I would like to highlight how all these protests and actions had a strong visual effect, and they were intended to be mediated, the visuality, and social media, I think, played a role, an important role in not only organizing but spreading the message and spreading the discussion and putting out, for example, these references to the national anthem, or, for example, other kinds of graphics, or even to serve as a way of preserving these interventions on El Ángel, because if you go there right now, they are all erased, but they are kept in the memory or in the archive of these social media, of these accounts that share and spread these images.
Thank you very much, Doctors Marco and Christina, for your thoughtful response.
You're welcome, anytime.
All right, thank you, Gilbert, and thank you both for presenting. Up next, I will close out the webinar by re-inviting Director Sakina Moore to the stream.
Great. Thank you, William and Gilbert, for putting together the webinar for this month. And I also wanted to thank Dr. Marco Antonio Chavez Aguayo and Dr. Christina Garduño Freeman for your very insightful presentations into the conservation of contested monuments and of divisive monuments. I also wanted to extend gratitude for everyone who is here today. That your presence is helping to spread the word about the work that we're doing and the work that's being done around the world with regards to contested and oppressive monuments. I also wanted to thank the Mellon Foundation for their generous support for our work. Without the generous support, our work would not be possible. I wanted to encourage you to follow us at www.worldheritageusa.org just to keep updated on the work that we're doing. And also, if you are in Texas next week from November 1st to November 3rd, we are having our symposium, and it's going to be at San Antonio, at the University of San Antonio. So please do sign up. The registration closes tomorrow, October 28th at midnight Eastern Standard Time. So we definitely thank you so much for logging in today, and we hope to see you in Texas. Have a great weekend and be well. Thank you.